Hey, welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction. More importantly, it's about recovery. And it's brought to you by our friends at Reprieve Recovery, who I just had the chance with. I went golfing with them.
Okay.
In a recovery community celebrated golf tournament.
Oh, so like a sober tournament.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But I was talking to Ryan Brown and John Redd, and they were telling me all the wonderful things. And believe it or not, they've had 34 graduates from their program already.
Really?
And great
That's
success
awesome.
is coming from them, because a lot of times in the recovery world, success is measured by the time that they've stayed sober. And so right now the history is, 5 to 6 months is what they've got working with them. And he said they're about 85, 90%.
Okay.
Which is amazing.
Yeah.
That first year is really tough for everybody. So they're doing wonderful things up there at Reprieve Recovery up there in Morgan, Utah. They have 12 beds. It's an all-female facility and just doing cool things. So I was doing this tournament, and it was for Wasatch Recovery, who we've had a lot of people from their house on our show. That's Christian Smith and Corey and all the Mark and all the good guys up there.
Fun guys, yeah.
And so they had this big tournament, and it was kind of like I'm still trying to process it all, because like when I was lining up, to get into the tournament, I'm looking at all these people, and a lot of the people at that tournament have been on this podcast. Micah, Tyler
awesome.
Hansen, all those guys were there, and we were in a foursome, and Brian Heaton was in our foursome, and he's also been there. He's with the Renaissance Ranch, and we're teeing off, and I didn't think the benefit I got from it is what I was going to anticipate, if that makes sense.
Okay, it was a surprise.
It was a surprise, because there I was golfing with 3 guys in long-term recovery. And normally when I'm out and about and I'm golfing or I'm in a group of 4 or more, I'm the anomaly. I'm the guy.
You're the one sober guy.
I'm the one sober guy, or I'm the one guy in recovery.
Yeah.
So, sometimes I am the one sober guy, and sometimes, even though everybody's sober, I'm the one that's the addict.
Yeah, you're
recovery.
the guy in recovery.
And so sometimes it's a lot of people asking me questions, trying to figure out their sobriety or loved ones' addictions or what it may be. But there I was with 4 like-minded people, just like myself, addicts, and just had a great time. And I was like, afterwards, I'm driving home, and I was like, that recharged my batteries, man.
Okay.
It was so cool to be around these guys, because I was the one asking all the questions. Because Brian,
they were ahead of you.
Yeah, all of them. I think me and Ryan Brown are pretty similar in sobriety. I think he might be 5, and I'm coming up on 6 years. But Brian has 11 plus years. Johnny Redd's got 8 or more, I believe. And so I'm asking them questions. And it was like, I was just inquisitive. I was like, so, what was 10 years like? And what's one thing you wish you could do again? And, and then he was telling me Brian was about his relapse. And I was just, it was very cool to be surrounded by people that were my community.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we get to just dip our toe into it because of this podcast, where people will come into our world and we just get a little slice of what's going on in the recovery community. But there I was, immersed in the whole community.
Oh, I mean,
it was probably 144 plus people in active recovery.
Yeah.
And just from all over the state, and every hole you would go to, there was somebody who was in a sober house, or who has just gotten their first year chip, or whatever it was. And so they were asking, and it was, I was just like, holy cow, man.
A lot of good conversations.
Oh, yes.
And mentors. Like, that's what's great is in the recovery world, people that are ahead of you can act as a mentor. You can ask them questions. They can give you guidance, tips, that sort of thing, support.
Sometimes you'll see somebody who's in recovery, and they'll go, I've only got 30 days. And they'll kind of downplay it. And you go, you know what? To get to 2 years, you have to get those 30 days.
Yeah. That's a good point.
You know what I mean?
Can't skip ahead.
Yeah, so don't downplay it. Right. Every day is a blessing, and every day is a gift. So whether it's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 1 year, 2 years, all those days matter to get you where you need to be.
Absolutely. And 30 days, man, that's a huge accomplishment. Do you remember what it was like for you, 30 days?
I thought 30 days would never happen.
Yeah.
I was like, I can't imagine a world where I have gone 30 days without alcohol. It sounded so foreign to me, and I thought, I'll die before I make it to 30 days. Like literally thinking I was going to die.
Yeah.
Like I cannot function without alcohol. And you want me to go 30 days? You might as well make it 1,000 because I'm not getting anywhere close to that.
I think effort-wise, 30 days might represent a bigger accomplishment than 5 years, because in a way, getting to the 5th year isn't maybe that much different than getting to the 4th year, but getting from day 1 to day 30, that's a big accomplishment. And
I think sometimes you get a little complacent after 3 or 4 years. I know in some of the things and some of the aspects of my recovery, I know I have, and not had to work as hard. But to get to that 30 days,
that's tough effort every day.
Yes, because that's all you're thinking about. And that's why in a treatment facility is so important, because if you're in that treatment facility, you've got 30 to 45 days where you are just working on that. You're working on yourself and you're working on that. And so you finally get to turn it inwards and go, okay, how can I do this?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that 30 days, I remember when I'd go into the first rooms, like the 12-step rooms, people would be like, unless you've got 2 years, we don't want to hear from you.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting there and I've got 5 days. And I was like, I want to hear about the guy who's got 15 days. Yeah. Because to me, that seems impossible. And so I think all of that is important.
Why do they do that, do you think? Like, why do you think some guys are kind of create that dynamic?
Well, egotistic. I mean,
I think so. Yeah.
I mean, I think there's some of that in there, and I think some of them feel like they've earned the right after 2 years to speak, and I think experience is some of it, and they know that they've got a certain amount of time in this meeting.
Yeah.
And if you get everybody to come up there with 10 days and stuff like that, you're not getting some of the true wisdom in there. And so they've got to do better at balancing it out, I would think. But yeah.
Yeah. I think there's I think human nature, we kind of create elitism.
Yeah.
Like people who kind of can get into their ego and feel like they're better than others. But I see what you're saying about the, like if you're going to show up to a meeting, you do want to walk away with some wisdom, some inspiration, some guidance. And so, I could see how that has to be there too.
And we learn more by listening, you know what I mean? And so sometimes in that early stage, you're better served listening.
Well, you often get like these guys that they're just talkers, Oh,
yeah.
And they're just going to get up there and waste the time. They just talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you can find some good stuff in there.
They ever hook them off the stage with like the big hook,
I think you'll see people down there going like, okay.
Hurry up.
But one more thing. But I've heard some great rambles in the 12-step rooms.
Yeah.
I have. But that was a lot of fun for me to be able to out and be a part of that. So
is that a yearly thing they do?
Yeah, and I guess this is just put on by Wasatch Recovery.
Okay.
And it was
like a fundraiser for them, maybe?
Yeah, and so I was like, what does this money go to? And they goes, well, to help scholarship people.
Oh, see, that's what I like to hear.
So if people come in, and they don't have it, or they're going to sober living, and so I met many people there that said, well, my first 2 months were covered.
Yeah.
And then our good friend was there from the Sobriety Foundation. So I mean, it was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
So you've got some information for us. Unfortunately, we do not have a guest today.
Right, we're the guests.
Yep. But that's okay because we're going to answer some listener email.
So the listeners are the guests.
Yeah.
See, look at that.
Text messages, and then we're going to dive into Dr. Matt's big brain. So you are listening to Project Recovery. Stick around. We're deep diving into Dr. Matt's brain. And welcome back to Project Recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt Woolley. And Project Recovery also brought to you by our friends at Big O Tires.
Yeah.
Getting you back on the road.
I need new tires for my little pickup truck.
Well, we'll go to Big O Tires.
I should.
They'll sell you 4.
Yeah, that's all I need, really.
Oh, yeah, then you're good to go. Hey, so I've got this email that somebody sent to us.
Okay.
And I try to get back to everybody I can.
You do a really good job of that.
But sometimes
nobody wants to hear from me, so I let you do it.
Here's the thing. And so they tell me their sobriety date, and then they say 7 years.
Uh-huh.
And then they start out with the conversation. Feeling a bit conflicted and bittersweet. I'm proud of myself in many ways, but I also feel a sense of sadness, loss, and mourning for all the missed connections that alcohol seems to bring about. Social connections, friendships, shared experiences, and if I'm completely honest, I have found sobriety to be a bit of a lonely, desolate, colorless place at times. I still feel like I'm seeking and learning who I am and seeking out my authentic self and tribe, but hooray for 7 years.
Oh, that's a really honest email.
Yeah, and so it got me thinking, because we've been on this podcast now coming up on 6 years. And I remember sitting in my therapist's office, and he goes, alcohol's not your problem. And I go, pretty sure it is. And he goes, no, your problems are your problems. And until we figure out what those are, things aren't going to get better. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of people in the recovery world think that once they stop, life is going to be wonderful. And that's just not the case.
Right.
And so, in this
if you think of it as alcohol is my only problem, then that would make sense. It's like, well, if I stop drinking, then I won't have any problems and everything will be great. But your therapist was like,
no, alcohol was your solution to your problems.
Until it became an additional problem.
Yeah, and then it added to it. But and I think that's what a lot of people forget, and especially in this state that we live in, Utah, or just anywhere in general, that drugs and alcohol, although yes, are bad, they aren't the number one problem that's going on in your life.
Right.
You know what I mean?
They make everything worse.
Yes. Well, they seem to help at first.
It works till it doesn't, right?
And then yes. But I mean, it's trauma, it's childhood, it's anxiety, it's mental health. It's all these things that are within you that you're trying to run, numb, or hide from.
Yeah.
And that's what alcohol and drugs are doing. They're your solution to your problems before they become part of the problem as well.
True.
And so I'm looking at her text and I'm reading that and I go, and I try to apply it to my own addiction and my own recovery. And I had some good times with alcohol. I'm not going to lie. But I don't know if it was the alcohol that made him a good time or would it have been a good time without it. Because what I'm finding now in my sobriety, and I just did a post on Instagram the other day, it was like, I thought sobriety was going to be boring. Mm-hmm. That was one
I think most people do, right?
But to me, who likes to have fun and wants to be the life of the party, I thought, how can I live in this world if I don't get to have fun anymore?
Yeah.
And that was one of my biggest hangups. It was like, I don't want to get sober because then that means I'm not going to have fun anymore.
Right.
And turns out I'm having way more fun than I ever imagined. Like crazy fun, but it's like genuine fun and genuine belly laughter and good times and emotions that I would never have before because they were all a little jaded and a little faded because of alcohol and substances.
And hard to remember those good times, quote unquote.
And so I think if you're thinking that that's the only way to have fun, we've got to redefine what fun is. You've got to figure out what truly makes you happy. The things about drugs and alcohol is they would make the mundane fun. I used to say it all the time. I was like, I can have fun doing anything if I got a beer in my hand. And I used to think that was a cool saying, but in retrospect, it's sad.
It's sad, and it's actually for you definitely not true because you have fun all the time anyway.
Yeah, so what I would say to this young lady is that you need to seek out there and see what's truly fun. You know what I mean? And if it's music, then go to a concert and dance like nobody's watching. Listen to the music.
Yeah. Beware
of your surroundings. I used to go to concerts and I had front row tickets to some of the biggest shows on earth and don't remember any of it.
Yeah.
Because I was either in the bathroom, in the beer line, or out of my mind.
Yeah.
And then my dad used to make my dad so mad. Because I love music.
Yeah.
Like me and my son the other day had this conversation. He goes, would you rather be blind or deaf, Dad? And I go, blind. He goes, why? I go, because then
I can still listen to music.
I can still hear the music.
Yeah.
And so I want to help this lady out because she thinks that life is colorless and kind of mundane and she's not finding the connections. And so how do we let her know that, you know what?
Connections.
Yes.
So let's stop on that word for a second. Right? Like, what do we always say? What's the opposite of addiction?
Connection.
Yeah. It's not just being sober.
It's not abstinence.
Right. It's not abstinence. It's not being sober. It's having connections with people, right?
And that's why that golf tournament yesterday was so much fun because of all the connections. I was sitting there and I had something in common with all these people. We all had a similar goal. We all had shared experiences and we were there together. And I was like, this is amazing.
Let me ask you this, though.
Yeah.
Because that's the Casey perspective of yesterday at the golf tournament. And you're an optimist and you're outgoing and you make connections with everybody. By the way, for the average listener, if you've never been around Casey, he knows everybody if he's ever been in that place before, right? So that's your personality. It's beautiful, big, wonderful. Did you notice anybody sort of hanging off to the periphery, people who weren't talking too much? And if so, what did you do about it?
Well, oddly enough, those are the people that I gravitate towards.
I knew it. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right, exactly.
Because I'm like, hey, well, why are you sitting over here? There's a party over here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The more the merrier.
You don't know people? Here, let me introduce you to some people.
Yeah.
Let's get, and that's what was cool is that when we'd go to each hole, there'd be people that were, maybe in their first year of sobriety or on the outside of recovery, we're either working in like insurance billing or this or what. And I'd be like, hey, so what do you do? What's going on? And I'd go, hey, these are just John Redd, this is Ryan Brown, this is Brian Heaton.
And so people may not know, if you go to a tournament, you have people at each hole that are there to greet you or show you stuff,
play you a game or whatever it is.
It's a lot of fun.
Give you some swag.
Yeah.
And that's what it's all designed to do. And so like some of the holes you could win a boat, others you could win $500. I got a blanket at one. They had a chipping contest at one. The interesting thing is that I talked to the cart girl. And if you ever watch Instagram Reels or TikTok or whatever, cart girls are usually getting hit on because everybody's just slosh drunk.
Yeah, they're just driving around selling beer.
And the lady goes like, I haven't sold much beer. And I was like, well, yeah, because this is a recovery tournament.
Somebody should have told her to stay home.
It's a recovery tournament. She goes, but I'm all out of energy drinks.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't an energy drink left to be found on that golf course, but they still had a cart full of beer. Yeah. But I mean, there was some people, but I tried to bring those people in.
I figured you did. Well, so for our listener here that sent us this really great email, and by the way, congratulations on the 7 years.
That's amazing.
Tremendous. She's ahead of you, and I can tell she feels proud about it. But it sounds like maybe in what she's saying, she's lacking some connections. That's kind of what I took away from that. And so, yes, I would agree that maybe going out and re-engaging with life, having fun is important. But I would encourage her to think like, okay, in the major areas of my life, like my home life, my friends and social life, my work life, could I, just in the places I already go, make either new and connections or better connections? Like maybe she needs to be the one that reaches out and walks up to the person on the periphery at work or home or the neighborhood and starts chatting them up. Maybe she needs to take a little page from the Casey Scott book of socializing and start to look for opportunities to make new and better connections. I don't know that that's the whole answer, but if she's listening, and I hope she is, that would be my advice as the psychologist in the room, is like, you know what? Focus on connections. Mm-hmm. I think that would bring the color back into her life.
And the other thing is that sometimes life is just boring at times.
Well, I'm 52, and I tell people, they're like, hey, what have you been doing? People are very nice. They'll come in, and if I've seen them for a while, and they'll want to know what I'm up to. And a lot of the times it's just, I want to have a cool story or something, but like it's mostly just like same old.
Planted tomatoes.
Yeah, and then I've gone home thinking about that. I'm like, why don't I have anything exciting to say? And then I realize, you know what? The older you get, the more boring your life is, it probably means you're doing all the right stuff.
Yeah.
Like if you're 52 and your life's really exciting every week, that might be a problem.
Well, I don't want to bring this in, but I think it plays, social media. Because we see everybody doing the best things of their life all the time.
All the time, seemingly.
You know what I mean? From
people only post like they're on vacation.
To boat to golf course. And
I
all
have a few friends on social media that I'm just like, are they on vacation all the time, 24/7?
Right? And so when you look at that, and then you're home in your socks, just planted your tomatoes, you're like, well, man, my life's nothing like that.
Go eat some spaghetti.
Yeah, but I would take these slow times versus the chaos that I had.
So I do think that brings in. We've talked a lot about mindfulness and meditation and being in the moment, and actually, neurologically, it's the healthiest place to be, and emotionally, it's the healthiest place to be. So there's a lot to be said about enjoying the peace of the moment, being in the now. Mm-hmm. But I think for this listener, I would really encourage connections. I think that's the next step for her.
I agree with you. So, but congratulations on the 7 years of sobriety.
Big deal.
That is a milestone, and that is huge. And maybe you can implement a couple of things we said and try to find a little color. But I would hazard a guess that if you sit back and look at it, your life is
pretty good.
Yeah.
Just it's different. I think some people some people like to gamble. You like to gamble. I don't like to gamble. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, it's more just a stress thing. It's not really a moral thing or anything. It's not fun for me. Unpredictability is not a lot of fun for me. But for some people it is.
Yeah.
And having like the chaos of the moment. And so when you get sober, you have a lot less of that. Life is much more predictable. And so I do think there's also like a cognitive shift of learning to appreciate when life is sort of predictable, and with predictability comes security.
Yeah.
And those good things, we have to learn to appreciate them if we're of the personality type who loves a thrill, adrenaline type, chaos and all that.
I got a chance to drive with my Frankie today in her car.
Yeah.
And we had to go pick up
chaos,
we had to go pick up some keys from my other daughter.
Actual keys?
Yeah.
Those still exist?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Because she parked behind the lovely Leslie, and Leslie couldn't go, so she had to take my truck. Long story short, we have to go up to Ogden to pick up these keys.
Ooh.
And Frankie's coming out, and she goes, I got to go the other way. And I go, why? She goes, I don't like to do left-handed turns. And I go, what? And she goes, yeah, Dad, left-handed turns scare me. And I go, are you being serious? And she was like, yeah. And she goes, they don't scare you? And I go, honey, I've never thought of that. That has never been anything that has crossed my mind.
That has crossed my mind.
Yeah.
It has.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, I was like, you're afraid of left-handed turns? I was like, is that a thing? And she goes, yeah, Dad, lots of people hate left-handed turns. And I go,
they're scarier than right-handed turns.
why? It's just a turn.
You got the traffic coming at you.
Well, yeah, you got traffic coming at you all the time if you're driving. Right?
It's all perspective, right?
I know, but that's the thing is that I was like,
I get that. I'm actually glad she's being cautious, though, at her age.
And she was an amazing
But that's
driver.
funny you'd never thought of that.
But that was what I was, and she goes, Dad, you've never thought of left-handed turns? I go, not enough to actually have a thought on it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was just
well, that's personality difference. Our personality is how we perceive, understand, and interact with the world. And you never perceived left-handed turns as an issue.
No, I just like, hey, that's just something we got to do.
Yeah.
And I didn't know there was an option. I mean, I guess there is always taking right-handed
You
turns.
can go all the way around the block.
Yeah, and I don't want to do that. No, it's like
You do need to learn to be comfortable with left-handed turns. I'm just saying other people, myself included, have sometimes been like, I hate this.
Really?
Yeah.
You got some information for us?
Do I have some information? Yes, I do. That was quite a segue. So I have two bits of information. I'm going to let you choose, or I'll let you and Josh weigh in which one we do first.
I say we do them both.
Okay, let's do them both. All right, let's do the fun one first.
Okay.
This one's titled "Losing Weight, Decreasing Alcohol, and Improving Sex Life."
Done and done.
Yeah, so I want to get your opinion on this. This is actually an article written by a doctor, and it's a case study that represents some of her other patients. And what's cool about it is she talks about what she does treatment-wise, and I want to hear what you think about it.
Yeah.
So she's talking. These are patients that are overweight and male and have an alcohol use disorder.
Which was me 6 years ago.
Yeah. So overweight males who are drinking way too much.
Yep.
And she typically prescribes in this two things: tirzepatide, off-label. Off-label means that it hasn't been approved for what she wants to use it for.
Okay.
It's been approved for other things. And then a small dose of naltrexone, which is, naltrexone, it's an opioid antagonist, as you know.
Yeah.
But it's used to block opioid receptors, help suppress opioid use as well as alcohol use.
Yeah.
Right. And so,
well, I mean, I've heard of naltrexone. I've heard of people taking that, and they've prescribed it in a pill or a shot, and that it helps them that like if they drink or they do that, they don't get a euphoric feeling, and they actually get a little bit sick.
Right. And I won't go into what this guy said, but he said that like a glass of wine would take him 2 or 3 hours to finish when he was on that. So he just didn't really have much of a desire to drink. So she prescribes both of these, and tirzepatide has two hormones in it. It's glucagon-like peptide, GLP-1, and glucose-dependent insulin-tropic polypeptide, GIP. Now, all that means is that these are actually two hormones that are naturally produced after we eat. So when we eat, our body produces these, and they've found that they kind of contribute to the feedback loop of addiction. Like it makes you want more and more and more. But at high levels, it limits the brain's production of dopamine. So they make synthetic versions of these, put them in this medication, give it to the patient, and that reduces dopamine production. Now, why do you think that's helpful to somebody who's overweight and trying to get their drinking under control? Like if you had less dopamine in your brain?
Well, because I think when you're an alcoholic or you're a drug user, you are always chasing the dragon, if you will.
Yeah.
You're always trying to get that dopamine hit. You're always trying to get that next high. And so you're continually chasing it.
Right.
And if your body says, hey, we're there, you're no longer chasing it and you feel satisfied.
Exactly. Exactly right. So dopamine's that neurotransmitter that's part of the brain's reward center, and it kind of makes us feel good and euphoric. And anytime something positive happens, you eat a big meal, you drink, you have a great interaction with somebody, your brain goes, oh, we want to do that again. And so it rewards you with that dopamine feeling, right? And so if you're taking this medication that helps reduce the brain's production of it, you feel more satisfied.
Yeah.
When you're eating and doing things. So anyway, that's all very cool.
Because that's what drugs and alcohol is,
Right.
is you're always searching for that ultimate high. And if you ask people who have done cocaine or heroin or whatever it is, they're always searching for that first high. That first time they took the pill where everything felt good. They're always
Right.
searching for that. And the scary thing is you'll never get that first time again. But you will spend the rest of your life, chasing it.
Yeah. And so that's great. It helps people want to drink less, eat less, and her patients started losing weight and drinking less. And then she found, as she continued to measure their progress, for the male patients, they almost always, she says, have an increase in testosterone as a result of those two benefits. So testosterone increases as your body mass decreases, so as you lose weight, and as you chronic alcohol use damages cells in your testicles. I don't know if you knew that, which produces the testosterone. So as you stop drinking, then the cells regenerate. They feel, they operate better, and you have more testosterone available. And so that kind of creates a positive loop where weight goes down, testosterone goes up. If you have more testosterone, you create more muscle mass as you're naturally more interested in exercising. Your body recovers, the cells recover. And he said at the end, his marriage has never been better.
Well, and that would make sense because I've now been working out for almost 6 years, constantly for 5 to 6 days a week for 6 years. It's very vital to my recovery. And when I got back out of recovery and started getting back into the gym, I noticed that I wasn't able to push the same amount of weight. My body wasn't reacting how it used to. And so I went and had a full panel done on my blood work.
Yeah.
And my testosterone was low.
And it naturally decreases as people go past the age of 40.
Yep.
But things like being overweight, drinking alcohol, obviously are two major contributors in it being even lower.
So I went to a hormone specialist who...
endocrinologist.
Yep, who put me on a testosterone regimen. And so now I take testosterone.
Okay.
And it has done everything that you just described.
Yeah.
I've got more muscle mass. I've lost weight. My sexual libido is... I don't want to...
Back in business.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what I mean? But when I was overweight, lethargic, alcoholic, that was the last thing on my mind. I mean, it really was. I mean, and not only that, I didn't feel good about who I was. I showered with a shirt because I didn't like the way I looked. I mean, it was just a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's why when we have the people in from Fit to Recover or, Amy Green for her fitness.
Yeah.
I mean, the body is amazing. And the rebound capabilities that we have is just, it blows my mind because here I am at 50 and I'm in better shape than I was in my 30s and 40s.
Yeah, no, you look it too.
And so I feel great, I feel good, and it's all because of that. And so I mean,
and one of the reasons, I like to read research and stuff. I always learn something new. I mean, it makes sense because we know alcohol damages cells in general, but I hadn't really thought about the fact that specifically they damage the cells in your testicles that make testosterone.
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah, and so it kind of makes sense that when you stop drinking, all of that comes back online, and it's pretty good stuff, right?
Way good stuff.
Yeah. So anyway, there, if you are somebody who's, or you have a loved one who's overweight, male, and drinking too much, and they're been wanting to make some changes, go in and talk to your doctor about tirzepatide and naltrexone.
When I was in...
Because, I mean, honestly, that plus some exercise can turn everything around.
Some of my gym-going buddies have been praising peptides for years now.
Yeah.
They were like, hey, you got to get out of these peptides.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't even know peptides. What?
But don't get them from the gym guys. Go to your doctor.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had a guy who said he could give me some peptides.
Yeah,
but I was
he
like,
gets some peptides out of the back of his Chevy Nova.
I'm cool, man. Behind the Costa Vida.
Exactly.
I don't want to get my peptides there.
Yeah, no. The other thing I have here is teen cannabis use tied to dramatic increase risk of psychosis. We've talked about this before, but this is a new study out of University of Toronto and a few other people that helps support this study. And they found that cannabis use is more strongly associated with more severe psychotic outcomes with teenagers than other age groups.
So let's talk about this because, I mean, we've been doing this a long time now, and I've had family members who were put into a drug-induced psychosis.
Yes.
And so what does that mean?
Well, let's define psychosis.
Okay.
So psychosis definitely means your brain's not functioning correctly. And
are we seeing things that aren't there? Are we hearing things that aren't there?
The two typical main categories are delusions and hallucinations. So hallucinations are your five senses are not functioning properly. Sometimes you'll, if you've studied like people who don't detox properly, they'll say feel like they had bugs crawling on their skin.
Yeah, pins and needles.
Yeah, tactile dysfunction. Seeing things, hearing things are two of the hallmark symptoms of schizophrenia, which is one of the hallmark diagnoses that includes psychosis.
Yeah.
You can become psychotic, though. You can have those same symptoms that a schizophrenic has by having untreated major depression, maybe untreated extreme anxiety disorders, but also by drugs and alcohol being toxic in your system, and they can create psychosis. I can't think of a worse thing than being psychotic. Back to deaf or blind, I'd rather be both of those than psychotic, I think.
And you know, the thing about psychosis and psychotic, I mean, that term gets thrown around for somebody acting crazy, like, oh, you're being psychotic.
Yeah.
You know, and I get what people are doing there, but true psychosis and psychotic is...
It's a brain disorder, and it's so scary. I've talked to so many patients who have been psychotic in the past and for various reasons are no longer psychotic. And it's traumatic. It truly creates trauma to feel paranoid. So the other thing is delusions and being paranoid, thinking things that aren't real. So when we're talking about teenagers are at high risk for psychosis, it's not like they're going to act crazy and wild. It's that this poor kid's brain is being damaged. And so they're seeing and hearing things that aren't there and having other hallucinations, but they're also learning to think in a way. I've had kids on the couch who've talked about things like wondering, is this real? Am I real? Am I dissociating? Are people following me? I remember one kid who was using it a lot was talking about, thinking his iPhone was reading his mind. That sounds sort of silly to say unless it's really happening to you, and then it is scary and awful. And so what they found is by tracking kids who don't smoke versus or use marijuana, cannabis, because there's lots of different ways to use it now, versus kids that are heavy users of it, so daily or nearly daily. And then they took those kids and looked at things like emergency room and hospital visits. What they found is the kids who don't hardly ever have emergency rooms or visits. The kids who do are at 11 times increased for having going to the hospital for psychosis than kids who don't use marijuana.
Two follow-up questions. Is it because the drugs are harder now and they're more potent, or are some people just more pre-wired or predisposed to psychosis?
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up. On my list here is it's hard to compare to past marijuana use data for a variety of reasons. One of them is we know for sure that the THC potency in what is being used today in cannabis is much, much more potent than was used when we were growing up.
And I know that for a fact, not because of use myself, but because I've talked to old stoners who go, the weed today is not like the weed back then.
Well, everyone nowadays likes to say, it's organic, man.
Don't panic.
Don't panic. It's like, well, is it organic anymore? Because, technically, I guess it might be, but it's been genetically modified to be stronger. That's just the fact.
There was a strain called Charlie Sheen.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's called the train wreck and stuff like that. So, they're trying to maximize the THC in these.
So they're trying to they've done it. botanists can genetically modify almost any plant, and certainly there's been a lot of motivation in that community to genetically modify these cannabis plants, and they're much more potent than they used to be. But it's also the delivery system. How many kids out there right now are doing, lighting up a joint? Almost none.
So I was talking to my stepdaughter about this. And because she loves to ask me about my history, and we have these wonderful open conversations. And I go, there's really only 4 ways to introduce drugs into your body. There's injecting, there's smoking, there's sniffing, and then there's eating. And most people end up going to the injection because it's the quickest way into your system. Mm-hmm. I go, but you think about, and we were specifically talking about marijuana. I was like, nobody really smokes flower anymore.
No.
It's either an edible or it's a vape pen.
Right.
And those are pretty quick.
And so they're also, like with dab and the vape pens, they're getting high concentrations of THC. So a puff on a joint, especially one from the 80s, wouldn't even compare to somebody taking a puff on a dab pen today.
Right.
And so that's the other thing, is somebody who sits there and hits that vape pen over and over again is getting a much higher experience of concentrated THC. And if you are, and then the third thing is adolescent neurodevelopment. If your brain is right in the thick of developing your ability to use your executive function, which is judgment, reason, foresight, problem solving, focus, concentration, all that stuff is the last part of your brain to develop. And trust me, that's why teenagers are so squirrely, is because they're trying to develop that. Other parts of their brain, you can talk to a teenager who's like just got an A on their physics test in high school, but then they make the dumbest decision of all time. And it's because that part of their brain isn't developed yet. And so we're introducing high levels of THC into those developing brains. It's very dangerous. And the research, I love the people that like to argue about it. It's like, no, it continues to prove that especially amongst adolescents, it is very, very dangerous. And I don't think anybody has ever thought, I'd like to be schizophrenic, but that's essentially what's happening with these kids who are having these horrible experiences, becoming psychotic and ending up in the emergency room.
Think of your teenager's brain as a road under construction. You got all this going on, and then you open up a stampede and go run through that.
Yeah, just run through. That was me trying to get here on 2nd South today. Yeah.
But that's what you're doing is, what I mean? All these things are trying to connect these dots, this off-ramp here, this there, we're putting up a light here, we're doing this, and then you're taking 1,000 horses and running through it.
Yeah.
And going like, I hope nothing gets damaged.
Nobody wants to turn left there.
Yeah, no. But so let's go back to the pre-wired. Are they predisposed? So does that play into it?
So this particular study actually talked about the fact that they weren't able to control for that piece of it. Mm-hmm. However, that piece of it's kind of hard to control for anyway, because just because you had parents and relatives that have used, we're not really at the point where we can accurately predict exactly how something like drugs and alcohol are going to affect your brain, or if you are predisposed to psychosis. But even other studies that have pulled people out of the study if they had a first-generation relative with a psychotic disorder, still it doesn't change the outcomes of the study. So what that tells me is that's just another level of risk. Mm-hmm. Like if you're a regular kid and you're smoking a lot of weed, you're at 11 times the risk of someone else developing psychosis. If you're a kid with a family history of psychosis, I don't even know how high that risk is. That would just be just almost paramount to self-damage, self-harm.
Once you enter psychosis, and you said you've known some people who've entered and came back.
Yeah, I mean there are different ways to become psychotic. If you're working with a severely depressed person who develops psychosis, obviously treating the depression typically brings them out of psychosis. I've definitely we've had people here on the show that, whether they use that word or not, telling their story, you could tell they were psychotic.
Yeah.
I've worked with patients who have used drugs and been psychotic and come back, but it takes a while. And we're also talking about what's the difference between a teenage brain and an adult brain. An adult brain that's fully developed and then gets into using drugs, they have a much better likelihood of returning to closer to normal once they get sober and stop using that drug, than a teenage brain whose development gets messed up, and then they don't have a normal baseline like an adult might. That's my point.
Because you've rewired, you've made new neural pathways. You've done.
Well, you didn't rewire. You just wired it for psychosis. Like it's the first time. It is getting wired. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like you don't get to go back to something that never happened.
Ooh.
And that's why alcohol. We've accepted it forever that alcohol is bad for kids and teenagers. That billboards, like that's not nobody.
I'm doing
would
a campaign
even
right now with Tamara Vaifanua, and we're talking about the importance of talking to your kids about underage drinking.
Yeah.
I've sat down with my teenage daughters and said, listen, you guys are going to decide whether you want to drink or not, and I hope you don't, but if you do, Dr. Matt and the study suggests wait till you're 24, 25.
Exactly.
Give yourself a chance.
Right.
Because right now you're just setting yourself up for failure.
And we know there's a thing called fetal alcohol syndrome. That's also a critical period of neurodevelopment when the fetus is growing. If the mother drinks alcohol, then it can damage that growth, and it never comes back to normal or baseline. And so another severely important area of neurodevelopment is adolescence. There's a ton going on, and you're wiring that brain in many ways for the first time, and arguably the most human part of your brain, your frontal lobes, your executive function. And so when we mess with that wiring, how do you go back to something that never got wired right in the first place?
It's like IKEA instructions. There's going to be leftover parts.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Does anybody understand this stuff? Because I don't.
That'll make you psychotic, right?
Yeah. I was like, man.
Anyway, so you know how I feel about people who love to say that there are cure-alls and this and another thing the article brought up, and we won't get into, is the changing perception. So if you go back to even the 90s, where there was a lot of drug and alcohol abuse amongst adolescents, that there was a much higher rate of them knowing that it was bad for you. Nowadays, when you survey adolescents, teenagers, they don't know that because they've been told by adults, by the media, by the fact that we have weed stores for medicinal marijuana. Oh, it's good for you. It's healthy. It's organic.
Helps grandma sleep.
Helps grandma sleep, helps grandpa's knees, whatever. Now their perception is, oh, it's good for you. Not just that it's not bad, but there's this dramatic increase in teenagers actually believing that it's good. And I can't blame them for that. That's not their fault. That's our fault. Mm-hmm. That's because we have fast-tracked in the United States weed can be legal for everybody. And the perception for somebody growing up is, oh, it's good for you.
Well, think about this. Alcohol is legal for everybody of age. Doesn't mean it's a good thing.
Right.
You know what I mean? It means somebody's making money off of it, and a good.
It's the same thing. There's a lot of money being made in marijuana.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Is like, I mean, I'm not this guy who's poo-pooing everything, but people say, oh well, alcohol is legal, but doesn't mean it's a good thing.
Oh, just because something's legal. I mean, that's a legality.
Yeah.
People say you're an adult when you're 18. How many 18-year-olds do you know are actually emotionally adults? Right. I've got one. Yeah. She's pretty good, but she's not doing her own taxes or anything. So, my point here is just this. I know no teenagers are listening to our show.
Yeah.
The people that are listening to our show are the people that are responsible for the teenagers. Mm-hmm. And my advice to you is look at the research, rely on the science. Don't go by your emotion just because you want to use marijuana. Be honest with yourself. You know it's not good for kids. It's not good for teenagers. Don't allow it. I will just flat out say, don't allow it in your home. Don't encourage your kids. Oh, if they use it at home, it's okay. You are messing with a brain system that will never be the same.
And my advice would be a little different than Dr. Matt's. My advice would be understand what you're talking about. Do the research before you talk to your kids. Do not go in there with just a hard line saying, don't do it because I said so.
No, because I said so encourages teenagers to do the opposite.
I think you need to sit down and have an honest conversation.
But that's what I mean.
With them.
Rely on the research. Talk to them about it. Just be like, hey.
And go, look, this is why I think it's a bad idea. I mean, I would be so far as going to do a PowerPoint. You know what I mean?
There you go.
And
Family meeting PowerPoint.
and sit down and go, this is why you shouldn't. Here's all the reasons why. Look, I'm not telling you never to do it because that's not my choice. It's going to be your choice when you're old enough. You can make your own choices. But while you're in my house, under my roof, these are the reasons why I would suggest not doing it. One, because I don't want you to live here. But two, because of this, and here's the history, here's the research, here's all the other stuff. And this is why your brain isn't developed and ready to make this kind of decision.
And I will say, just to sort of emphasize our point, I have read a lot over the last probably 3 years, maybe 4, on this issue, and I have never seen one research article that says the opposite. I've never seen one that says it's okay or good for an adolescent brain. Not a single one. It's just varying degrees of bad in all the research.
Varying degrees of bad. Well, thank you, Dr. Matt. That was awesome.
Well, I hope we get some fun emails about it, but Josh doesn't want.
Here's the thing. Let's have a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
don't like to argue. If people know me, I really don't like to argue, but I'm happy to talk about the truth, and the truth as we know it from the science, and people who are spending thousands of hours and millions of dollars to research this are telling us, keep your teenagers away from marijuana.
Well, thank you for stopping by and listening to another episode of Project Recovery, where we dove into the message bag. We listened to Dr. Matt, and we shared some fun stories, and hopefully gave you a little something to talk about.
How to improve testosterone.
Yeah.
Right?
Peptides.
I think we have a new record on the show today.
What?
I said testicles twice. 3 times.
Yeah. Test. That's how you make sure Mike's on. Okay. Test. Hey, thank you for stopping by and listening to another episode of Project Recovery.
I wasn't sure if we were done.
And in case you forgot, Project Recovery is what?
It's a KSL podcast.
Test.